Hey gang, in this tutorial, I'm not going to walk you through any specific effects or doing anything with the software. This is about how to think about VFX and achieving what you're trying to do, because that's really what's at the core of all this. No matter how much training you do, how many tutorials you go through, how many classes you take, there's always going to be something that you'll come across in your career later on that you don't know specifically how to do or what would go into it. And so what's really important, more than knowing all the specific tools, is knowing how to think about VFX and how to approach them. And so I just want to give you a quick walkthrough of the thought process that will help you through the rest of this semester and hopefully through the rest of your career as you're trying to achieve different things. So first off, I don't want to skip the crucial question of where do I need effects in the first place? And there's lots of different things that you might be able to use effects for, but I'd encourage you, as you're approaching a project and figuring out where can I use this tool in an effective way, to just ask yourself a couple questions. The first one is there something that was planned but needs to be executed? This is kind of the most obvious place for VFX, is in the production or in the script. There was something that was shot with the expectation that there's going to be a VFX. Somebody's supposed to be looking at something on the screen and it's not there on the screen and needs to be created. Someone's interacting with something that's not yet there and needs to be replaced. Someone shot against a green screen and that needs to be replaced. So those are kind of the most obvious elements. Second is there's something that can help the story or mood or tone. Maybe it's not something that's required for the story to make sense, but it will help clarify something. Can you add a logo or change a sign or something that gives us a little more information? Is there something playing on a TV in the background that helps set the tone for something? Can you change the look of something a little bit to better fit the mood and what you're trying to achieve? I would say a simple example of this from a project I did that we have looked at in class where the VFX came in was in Echoes. There are a lot of shots that have sort of required VFX to achieve what was being sought after. But there are also a bunch of shots where we're concerned about, hey, we want this to feel really isolated and we want to remove other people and vehicles and stuff from the background. And other places we want it to feel crowded when she's in the mall at certain times, and let's add some more people in. And those weren't things that were needed for the story to make sense, but just the kind of fine tuning to really, do I want it to feel more isolated or more busy at this part? And there's a lot of things like that with VFX that can help. If you look at a lot of VFX demos on the internet, one of the things you'll see is, yes, there's the big flashy CG and those sort of effects and explosions and transformers and stuff like that. But there are a ton of effects used for, like, hey, this was kind of shot on a little warmer day than we want it to. Let's, change the color of the leaves. Let's add some snow in the ground, make it feel a little more cold and isolated, or vice versa. This was shot on a blustery fall day and we want it to feel a little more like spring or summer. So let's, add some leaves to the trees and green things up and, remove the breath that we can see in the air and stuff like that. So these don't always have to be huge visible things, but anything that will help your story achieve what it's trying to achieve, or help us understand what's going on, or understand a character, or feel the emotion better. Those are always important places for visual effects, and ones that often get overlooked because they're not as obvious, but things that can be just as effective as some of the more flashy ones. And the last category is there something wrong that could be fixed? The most common one, did a boom mic make it into the shot that wasn't supposed to? Or, can we see an actor's lav or a wire sticking out that we weren't supposed to? There's, some equipment that accidentally got left in the back of a shot, or we see a camera case, stuff like that. Or, something else that wasn't supposed to happen and takes us out of the reality a little bit. A car's driving by in the background, and in the window you see the person like looking out and watching the shoot happening when there's nothing in the diegetic world that they should be looking at. So the first important question I would say just always to ask is, where can I use effects productively? And maybe that would have been a better way to phrase this than where do I need effects? There are some places where you need them, and there's some places where you don't need them, but you can use them helpfully. On the flip side, I would say don't go looking for places to put in effects just to put in effects. If it's not going to help your story, if it's not going to affect the tone and the mood and get us into the story and engaged, maybe it's not worth the time spent on it. Unless it's something that, just you're putting in for an Easter egg for yourself or something, that's fine. These are kind of three major categories. Okay, so let's say we have some effects we want to do. Now, the big question and the focus of this is, how do I make those happen? First thing I would say is, take yourself out of the software for a second. I think it's a big mistake to just rush into software and start trying to play with a shot immediately. First thing you want to do is articulate really clearly, what am I trying to do? I want to remove this from the shot. I want to add this thing into the shot. I want to change this into this, and be very clear about what you want to try to do. Then start saying, okay, I got this end result. I know where I want this to be. What are the steps that it might take to get there? So if I'm removing something from the shot, like, okay, I want to remove this camera case that's in the background of the shot. So what I'm going to need to do is find a chunk of floor and wall that match what should be there, or I'm going to need to create that or something. And I'm going to need to put that on top and replace what was there instead. The problem is this actor walks in front of it, so I'm going to at some point need to do some masking or roto or something to isolate him so we don't cover up him, but start thinking about the steps it might take to get there. And it can be helpful to think in terms of concepts first. So in the example I was just using, I don't necessarily have to start exactly thinking I need to make a mask and make these layers and stuff. I'm thinking, okay, I need to find or create a chunk of wall and floor that I can drop in front of this camera case to cover it up and make it look like the camera case isn't there. That's what I'm trying to do. And then I'm going to think step by step of the software what I need to achieve that. So, okay, I'm going to need to create another layer. I'm going to need to find a section of that wall and floor that looks the same, or draw something or create something that does. I'm going to need to move that in front when this actor comes through. I'm going to need to create a mask and outline the part of their body that walks in front of that camera case and make a new layer with them that goes in front of my replacement layer so that they don't suddenly walk behind a magic little square of wall that showed up there. So I would say first think conceptually, here's what I want to do, then think step by step. I'll use one more example from our first homework challenge assignment, which was creating this sort of Marvel logo thing. And one of the challenges with that was the sort of 3D element. One of them was just sort of creating the text in the cut out of this block. So like, okay, I want to sort of make a big rectangle that's a solid 3D object, and I want this text cut out of it. And that's really what I want to do. And then I start to think step by step in the software what I need to achieve that. Like, okay, I'm going to need to make a shape that's a big rectangle. I'm going to need to make a shape that's these text. Then I'm going to need to find a way to make that text get cut out of the 3D block. Once I have that 3D piece built, then I'm going to need to use my transform tools to move it and make the camera move, or make the object move to go from this part inside the block and pull back and reveal it. So I start to think about those specific steps. And none of this at this point, I'm actually in the software. This is just clearing up what you're doing. And this might seem kind of obvious, but I see a lot of mistakes where people know something they need to do and they sort of rush in and start working on something and get themselves down a rabbit hole, or do a lot of work that ends up not being useful because they didn't think through what the whole process is. So if you're doing an effect, particularly if it's something you haven't done before, it can be really useful to actually stop, like think about this and even write it down. Like, these are the steps of what I'm trying to achieve, because then you can start breaking those down into little steps. And I think that's a really useful way to think about doing visual effects, is the smaller steps you can break things down to, the easier it is, because it clarifies, okay, in this step, I'm not worrying about everything that needs to happen after this. I'm not worrying about what stuff I've already done. I just know in this step, I need to do this. And if I can figure out how to do that, I can move on to the next step. That can be less overwhelming than I need to make all this stuff happen and you're not kind of sure where to start. And it also makes sure that you've thought clearly about everything that is going to need to happen, so you don't get halfway through an effect like, yeah, I did a bunch of stuff I know how to do, and now I'm kind of stuck and not sure where to go from here. And maybe it turns out you needed to do something different way back at the beginning to be able to do the thing you want to do now, but you didn't think stepwise through the process. So we're going to do that. And then the final step here is going to be actually executing it in the software, which in our case is usually going to be After Effects, although there are other effects softwares that you can encounter in the world as well. So first, think about the order of what needs to happen, going back to what I just said. So you're thinking about this stepwise, breaking it down into the smallest, most manageable chunks. And again, the smaller these steps can be, the more straightforward, the better. So I don't really want to have a step that's like, I need to replace this character with a tree over here. I want to think about, okay, am I going to just cover him with the tree? Am I going to remove the character first and then I need to add in a tree? Okay, if I'm going to remove the character, what do I need to do? Well, I need to find something that looks like that background so I can get rid of him and replace it with the background first so he is gone. And then I'm going to need to find this tree footage. And then I'm going to need to put that tree footage into my composition, I'm going to have to mask out the things that are not a tree in the footage. So the more you can break it down, the better off you'll be. Now you're in the software and say, okay, I've got this list of steps I need to do. What are things that I already know how to do? I need to make a mask here. Great, I know how to do that. I need to change the color grade here. Okay, I know how to do that. So thinking of all those things that you can do. And then think, what don't you know how to do? And here again, the smaller the steps you can be, great. You can be really specific and granular. That's helpful. And what I mean by granular is if you go looking for help on, I don't know how to make this big rectangular metal block that has letters cut out of it for the challenge assignment I mentioned, you're probably not going to find specific help on that. So let me jump down here for a second and look through these sort of tips and places to go to try to figure out the things you don't know. Check Canvas for class tutorials. Maybe I posted something about this, or like, hey, here's a link that points you in the right direction on this. If it's something similar to something I've done in the past, even if it's a little different, what if I use this existing technique I know and I try some different settings or options on it? I'm trying to cut something out and see some video through a hole I'm making in another layer. Well, I haven't done that, but I've used masks, and I know masks can like cut out and just show part of a layer. Is there something I can do if I maybe change the compositing mode, or if I make a different type of mask or overlay a couple of, are there things I can do with stuff I already know? Go through your After Effects menus and just see if maybe there's something there that looks promising. A lot of this can be when you're learning, trying out some things, and if it works, then great. If it doesn't, you're like, okay, now I know what that new option that I just tried out does, and maybe that'll be helpful to me on a different project down the road. Use search in the effects tab. So over on the right, you have this effects tab. If it doesn't show up, then go to your Windows and select effects. And there's a search function, and you can try what are built-in effects within After Effects. If I'm looking for some sort of a particle generator, if I'm looking for something that affects the color, or I want to do a blur, or I want to do something that creates noise or grain, like think of what you're trying to do. And again, the more specific and granular you can be, the better. And type in some of those words and see if there's anything that comes up on those. Sometimes there will be, sometimes there won't. But if you say, I want to do some kind of a blur, and I go to my effects tab and type in blur, you're going to get a whole bunch of options like, okay, I'm in the right direction. Now let me look at these and try to figure out which of these might do the kind of blur that I want to try to do. Is it a motion blur? Is it a camera blur? And try to think of the words to type in that might get you pointed in the right direction there. You can also do an internet search for tutorials. There are a ton of great After Effects tutorials online. There's also some on the LinkedIn Learning page that you can access through SMU. The key here is finding the right words. There are tons and tons of tutorials, and if you don't know the right thing to search for, you're going to have a hard time finding one that's going to help you. Sometimes this would be really straightforward. If you're having problems with masking and you say, I want a tutorial on masking in After Effects, you're probably going to find a ton of things. If you say, I'm looking for how do I cut out text from a 3D block in After Effects, well, what are the words you want to search for to do that? Maybe you try After Effects 3D, maybe try 3D titles, maybe try 3D deboss, which is the opposite of emboss, which is kind of what you're trying to do, is create some, depth into an object there. But try some different words and see what comes up and see if you can find something that's right. A lot of times you're not going to find exactly the situation you're looking for. So the more specific you can break down your problem, the better, because you're now no longer looking for, hey, I need how to do this whole long process. You're like, I really just need something that tells me how do I make this small step happen, and you're more likely to find a tutorial using the words looking for that particular small step than looking for the overall thing you're trying to do. And then, of course, you can ask classmates, see if anyone can help you. You can ask the instructor and see if you can get pointed in the right direction there. The more specific you can be about this, the better off you are in all these categories, because most of the challenges you're going to encounter in this class and in your own projects in the future, you're going to know how to do some of what's solving them. And there's often one or two aspects of it that are new to you. And if you can identify those and sort of bring it down to, well, really, it's just this one tiny little part I don't know how to do. It's a lot easier to learn how to do that than to think, man, I got to learn how to do this whole giant process. Even if that giant process is built out of 100 steps and you already know how to do 98 of them, thinking about it as this giant thing with 100 steps is a lot more intimidating and a lot harder to find the specific help you need than thinking about, well, I know how to do 98% of this. It's this one specific thing I don't know how to do. Let me find a quick tutorial on just that, and then I know how to do all the steps, and you'll feel a lot better. And lastly, don't be afraid to just try things. Part of learning visual effects and making visual effects happen, if they're anything at all interesting or not straightforward, is trying things and see what happens. And I will say, make sure you save often in case you really screw things up. You have a ton of levels of undo in After Effects. You can kind of go down a rabbit hole, and if it didn't work, back yourself up. I will often, if I'm going to try something weird and I'm not sure how it's going to work, and I've already put a lot of work into a project, I'll duplicate my composition. Like, okay, on this composition, I've got a copy of it saved where I was as far as I'd gotten. Now on this new copy, I'm going to try doing this thing and see if it works the way I want it to. And if it doesn't, I can always go back to that earlier one before I screwed it all up. If what I'm doing works, great. Again, if it doesn't, okay, well, think about why didn't it work? What can you learn from that? And whatever I ended up doing that didn't do what I wanted it to, is there some other place I might be able to use that effectively? I've definitely learned techniques over the years when I was trying to do one thing and I tried something and it didn't do what I wanted to. And I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of a cool effect. Let me file that in my pocket for future use in a different situation, because that actually did something that will be helpful. It's just not what I wanted to do right at this point. So you can learn things that way. And that's it. I hope that was helpful to you in thinking about the process of thinking about VFX and how to do them, and some strategies for how to break it down and how to put yourself in a position to succeed at doing it, and at figuring out what you don't know how to do and getting over those humps and learning how to do them. I think every assignment we'll do in this class, there's going to be parts that I've shown you how to do and that you should feel comfortable with. And there's probably going to be something that's a little bit different. You have to do something a little different than what I showed you, or add something to it, or combine a couple techniques. And that's intentional. And part of this is experimenting and figuring out how to put these things together to achieve what you're trying to achieve, to make your movie better, to make your story work better, to make us feel the emotion. And that's all the ultimate goal. So hope this was helpful. Good luck.